Terra, planet Earth, home to an estimated 7.3 billion human souls and counting. Each one of these people will live and die on its nearly 57 million square miles of land. Every day the number of living people increases, while the amount of land stays the same. World hunger is a problem that continues to grow with the world's population. According to the World Food Program, 805 million people are unable to live healthy lifestyles due to the malnourishment caused by lack of food. A large contributor of this food shortage is the limited amount of farmable land the Earth has, many of which is committed to producing feed for livestock. As more countries become developed, so does the demand for meat, which has many nutritional necessities, most notable of which is protein. Due to high meat prices and shortages, it can be difficult for these developing countries to obtain the needed daily requirements without a major decrease in population. Malnutrition and lack of meat protein will only get worse as time progresses. Luckily, there is a promising new technology that might solve this problem: in vitro meat production. When people think about artificial meat, they might be turned off by the idea that the product is inferior to meat obtained directly from slaughtering an animal. In a blind taste test, the New York Times reported that subjects decided that a hamburger made in the in vitro method was drier and much more bland than the conventional hamburger. Although it is true that the synthetic meat is of a lower quality in terms of taste, from a nutritional standpoint, it is of a similar quality to conventional meat and has a lot of potential as a staple food source for the low-income nations that need it. In order to dispel myths that may exist, it is important to know exactly how in vitro meat is synthesized. In vitro meat is synthesized without killing any animals whatsoever. Instead, a few starter cells are taken from an animal in a non-invasive biopsy. These starter cells are grown in a nutritional medium that mimics the environment of an animal's body. After a number of days, proteins begin to accumulate on artificial scaffolds that are placed into the culture, and the artificial meat is slowly built up. Although there is a large icky factor that people may associate with this process, it could be argued that current farming practices, such as hormone injections and slaughtering practices, also have an icky factor that needs to be looked past. An example of this is the notorious pink goo in McDonald's hamburgers. Another drawback of this technology was that, as mentioned, it has a taste difference. Many people living in developed nations, especially America, have a culinary taste for meat. Synthetic meat, while equally nutritious, lacks the same taste as traditional meat. This is due to the tissue being produced in the lab and it being pure meat with zero fat content. Flavor can be injected into the meat, however, it still lacks the same texture. People who have tasted in vitro meat say that it tastes better than tofu, but still not quite the same. There are many ethical considerations to consider when deciding whether or not there should be public support for research into artificial meat production. According to the USDA, more than 10 billion animals are slaughtered for meat every year in the United States. Do these animals have a right to not be slaughtered if we have the means of producing meat artificially? Animal rights groups may argue that we should do this. As of now, the cost for producing even a small amount of artificial meat is extremely high, and it is not feasible to feed many people with this technique. If the process ever becomes streamlined enough to make the cost low enough, these ethical questions will quickly come into play. Additionally, should wealthy nations support research into lowering the costs of synthetic foods, which would benefit low-income nations the most? Many would argue that we have a humanitarian duty to assist other countries in dire need. But should wealthy nations feel morally obligated to provide billions of dollars worth of research? Who should shoulder the cost of this research? Moreover, farmers and ranchers should have an active interest in this. If in vitro meat synthesis is feasible, aren't they at risk for losing their jobs? The answer is yes, and there is concern that consumers lose the choice of buying better tasting real meat if synthetic meats become the standard practice. Is it acceptable to produce a natural product being an unnatural product? Funding research of into in vitro meat could potentially end the problem of meat shortages as well as decrease overall prices of meat. But according to the BSE, there are more than 800,000 ranchers and cattle producers in the United States alone. These ranchers, as well as others indirectly involved in meat production, could potentially lose their jobs. Currently, there is little concern over this possibility, because at last estimate in 2008, the price to produce 1 pound of beef costs roughly $2 million US. While this might seem like a lot, there is much room for improvement in the production. In an economic study, it was estimated that with proper application and further research, the price of synthetic meat could fall to just over $5,000 US for an entire ton of meat. When you work out the math, it is currently double the cost it takes to produce conventional chicken meat in Europe. And with prices for meat steadily on the rise, within a decade, in vitro meat could potentially be cheaper than the traditional alternative.